Well, thank you both so much from either side of the Atlantic for joining us. My name is Jessica Fox. I'm the Screen and Broadcast Sector Specialist for XpoNorth. This in particular is a topic I'm incredibly passionate about: why investors give money to the arts, expert on expert. So we have Diane here. Diane, I'm going to take a big breath because she has a list of accomplishments. She's an institutional investor, which we can ask her what that means in a second. She's head of the private equity at the Kauffman Foundation, and also she's author of The Gig Economy. And if you have not read that book, I highly, genuinely recommend it. It's awesome. And she used to do some teaching, but we can ask her if she still does some teaching now. And we also have Ed. Ed also deserves a big breath in because of his list of accomplishments. Former involved in rugby, have gone over to the arts. He's the current chair of the Theatre Royal in Glasgow and board member of the Scottish Opera's Endowment Fund. And I know also very interested in film, has just had a Radio 4 program that he was telling us about on, and really, really active in the arts. So I am so excited to have you both here to dive into a really important topic. Can we start off with a little bit about who you are and what you do?
So, want to go, Diane?
Yeah, sure. So I'm a professional investor. I have been a venture capital investor for a number of years, investing in early stage startup companies, more in the tech sector than the art sector. And as Jessica said, now I manage the private equity portfolio for a foundation here. I teach in the MBA program at Babson, and I'm also a writer. So understand some of the funding challenges of pursuing a creative project. I've written 3 books, the most recent one on the gig economy. And I'm here in Boston, in the US.
And thank you so much. And Ed?
My background was in financial services, and I took the leap into producing with Bill Bryden's production in 1994 of the First World War epic production called The Big Picnic. Yeah. And slowly but surely ran away to the circus and became a full-time producer. Just immediately after that, I still act on both sides of the fence. I'm an exec producer, I'm a producer, and also an investor. I advise individuals on their investment strategies in the arts on a commercial basis, not really on a not-for-profit basis. Although my other side of the fence is I also sit in a couple of organizations that are not-for-profit, but I bring a business emphasis to that rather than a wish list.
That's amazing. So I also want to let people know in the audience that there is a Q&A chat button, and throughout, please leave questions in there. I really want you to make the most of having access to both Diane and Ed in one virtual room. So I will be continually checking the Q&A box, trying to slip in some of your questions. And at the end, we'll have a good chunk of time to get questions from the audience. So I have to hit you with maybe the hardest question first. Which is why investors give money to the arts. And I'm going to give you an example from an artist's perspective, why this question is really, really important to answer. I remember pitching my first film to an investor, and I had done all my research. I had done what the returns will be and the numbers and why this was actually probably a good business opportunity because we had a named actor involved, and he just started laughing during my pitch. And he said, "Oh, Jessica, no one invests in independent films to make money." And it blew my mind that he didn't want a pitch about the financials. He wanted a pitch that included my passion, why this thing needs to exist and what he's going to get out of it. So I think the more we can empower artists to really understand motivations of investors, the better artists are going to be in a variety of different fields like music and film and textiles and everything. So from your perspective, why do investors give money to the arts?
I'll start. I'll go back to your first point there about research. I think it is important you do research so you know the people you're talking to, and you're not going into a meeting that you're not fully informed, or you're insulting the people you're asking for investment from. I do see it as a business. I don't
Ah,
see it. I do see it as a business. I see you have to bring business principles to that. But most people that have come and invested in the theatre projects or the film projects I've been involved with have an interest in the subject. And their primary reason for investing isn't to make money. You're right, but it's to make sure they don't lose money. And that's a hard thing to balance. You know, it's a very hard thing to balance. That's why you should take advantage of all the tax schemes that are about to try and mitigate the investment risk. But from my point of view, it's an interest that they have in the subject matter.
Okay. And Edward, when you say they don't lose money, do you think investors who can afford to invest in projects are just happy if they break even and the thing exists?
It's not for widowers or orphans. You know, it's certainly not to put your pension fund into, but it's a risk strategy that's probably, if people have portfolios where they can afford to play a wee bit.
Okay.
That's the type of money you're looking for. So it's like the 5 to 7% of a portfolio that is there for, let's say, a wee journey, you know. And it's exciting too. You're in the show business, you're not in equities, you know, you're in something that's interesting.
Okay, thank you very much. That's good. And Diane, do you have the same perspective?
I might have a little bit of a different perspective. I totally agree that as an artist, you should be really clear on who you're talking to and what their interest is likely to be. And besides understanding the differences among individual or institutional investors, what organization might be funding you, I think it's also helpful to think a little bit about what is the medium that you're creating in, because I think it really varies. So for example, I said earlier that, you know, I'm an author, and I can tell you that if you're trying to publish a book, you know, they're very interested in what the potential financial return is, right? Publishing houses are not nonprofit entities. So if you're writing a book and you're going through the traditional publishing process, you just need to be aware of that. They are going to think about, you know, what are you going to do to help this book succeed financially? What are you going to do in terms of marketing and sales, and to be ready for those kinds of questions? I'm a film buff. I go to Sundance every year, and I can tell you, you know, same as what you both have said, if you're making an independent film, I think it's much more, you know, investors who resonate with the topic and who really want to see the idea out in the world, and they're willing to make an investment / grant, or, you know, maybe comfortable getting their money back, hopefully, or they might even be more in it for the prestige, right? The idea that you could be shown at a film festival or win an award at a film festival. So that might be more important to them than a financial return. I also have a good friend who is involved in the theater and makes investments in Broadway theater. She expects those investments to return. But I have another friend who's on the board of a local theater, and he supports that theater really as a grant. He doesn't expect to get anything back from that. So I think it really varies, and it varies by investor, and it also varies by medium, what the general expectations are.
Okay, that's really helpful. So to kind of build that bridge of empathy a little bit, so us artists can understand where you guys are coming from a bit, can you talk about the process of investment? And it doesn't actually have to be in the arts, because I know, Diane, yours is a little different, but Ed, you do invest in the arts. What goes on through your mind when you look at a pitch, when you look at a company? Do you think it's a numbers game? Are you expecting like 1 out of every 5 projects to work? How do you approach it?
I put myself in the pitcher's shoes, because I'm pitching for money all the time. So, you know, it's a two-way process. And so you have to have empathy with the people you're talking to, not sympathy, but empathy, and respect what they've gone into to come and talk to you, because I know they'll be nervous. I'm nervous talking to them, and vice versa. But it's subject matter is a big thing for me, you know. And there's certain things like action movies that we're not going to touch. No, we're not going to.
Really? Why not? You
We
just
just don't. We just don't. Doesn't float our boat.
Okay, got it. Is that
And also, they're far too expensive. There's a lot of people out there that do it a lot better, a lot quicker, distribute far more efficiently than we'd ever be able to do.
Yeah.
So our film budgets we look at generally are 2 to 5 million.
Yeah.
5 at the top. So that way you can manage the process, keep on top of it, keep your investors well informed, and look at the process for recouping or otherwise, you know.
Yeah.
But it's manageable money.
Can you talk a little bit about that recoupment process for people who might not be familiar?
So the recoupment process is a magic cauldron. And what I would advise every would-be writer, producer to do to maximize the negotiations you get on your actual fee, because at the end of the day, there's very little money left in the pot when it goes into distribution.
Yeah,
and that is heartfelt advice. You want to get your project made, be recognised, and maybe give you a starting block to your next project. Always be thinking about your next project and how you're going to get that funded, how you're going to get distributed. And generally, what's called the waterfall scenario, that's the waterfall of recoupment. They've all got wonderful names, but a lot of these waterfalls dry up. So what you've got to do is make sure that you're in that recruitment waterfall at some process. Your investors will always be looking to be out first, as will any broadcaster that's invested with you. You'll probably be in what's called a pari passu basis, that's an equalization of return on investment. And that is generally what people like Scottish Green or BFI will be looking at for investment. And some people say, why are they looking for money back? And you say to them, well, they're investors. They're looking after the taxpayers' money, you know, and they're going to fund from the success of your project, their next independent producer success or not. So it's a waterfall scenario of recoupment that you should place yourself hopefully in the second or third line, which means that your distribution agent will be able to report back to you how and when sales are going and what the potential is for you to get anything back. Bearing in mind that from distribution, when you're on a box office recoupment, you're only going to see 50% of the money that comes in anyway. So always have that in your head. Just be realistic, be totally realistic.
And I'm going to come back to you to maybe ask about a story or an example of your investment in a particular project that you're either proud of or that you'd like to talk about. So have that in mind. But Diane, can you talk a little bit about your experience as an investor? What you look for, some things you might be involved in currently, just kind of how that process works for you.
Mm-hmm. I mean, I think, you know, if you're talking to an investor who is interested in, you know, making some kind of financial return, and that is their focus, I think come to the meeting really prepared to explain, you know, what's in the budget, what are the real cost drivers, why they are where they are, how much wiggle room there is. And I also think it's important to have done the legwork around things like tax breaks or financing that you can get from government sources, to have demonstrated that you've done the work to get the money that is already available before coming to investors, because investors always want to make use of that kind of non-dilutive financing that just goes in without a lot of expectations. It's usually cheap money. It might not be the easiest money, but it's good to have. So having done the legwork on that. And if you're talking to somebody who is more focused on, who is okay with more of a grant model, then I think just being really clear, you know, to form a connection about whatever the subject matter is. Okay. And also to be clear about what you think the return might be, whether it will be break even or less than break even, just so that everybody's expectations are on the same page. So I think the more realistic you can be, the better for the longer term relationship, so that you have more credibility the next time around.
Are there, that's so important. And I just want people to hear, you do, if you're pitching to an investor that cares about the return, you need to understand what that looks like and how to show the mitigate risk and that you've done research. is there anything non-logical that goes through the head of an investor when you go to pitch to them? Eye contact, how they behave. Is there an assumption of how artists should be if they're good artists? Are you looking to see that they're dressed in an interesting way? Is there anything psychological that you could tell us about coming to an investor that we should be aware of?
Well, I mean, I think the most important sort of characteristics are passion, conviction, and preparation. I mean, I really, if having two projects in front of an investor, one of whom is like, I've gotten this financing, here's how everything is all set up. Here's the timeline. Here are some contingency plans. Here's what I'm thinking about in terms of distribution or marketing. Somebody who's really done a lot of the thought work is going to feel like a better bet than somebody who is, one step ahead of themselves, but hasn't really contemplated the entire arc of the project. So I really would emphasize preparation and practice for that. If there's a way that you can talk to other people who have successfully raised money, so they can give you a sense of, well, you should really, have an answer to this question, or you should really be prepared to talk about marketing or talk about sales figures. I think that's really helpful. So preparation is key. Somebody who's well prepared will make a difference.
And I really like that, talking about other people who have raised money. I remember speaking to a producer once saying, a relative had offered me £500 to go towards my film, and I felt so guilty about taking it. And they're like, oh, the Coen brothers always go to Neighbors to get their first film off the ground. And I'm like, oh, that's so interesting. But that's like, there's a slight discomfort, I think, about the idea of asking for money, taking money from people, believing that the process is worth it, because arts is a high risk in terms of them seeing any kind of financial return, but they might see other kind of returns. So Ed, can you tell us one story that comes to mind, either a really successful investment that you made that was an excellent process for you, or something that you learned from?
It's never easy.
Okay.
That's the bottom line. It's never, sometimes you get a bit of luck, but you make your own luck by working hard to get the good results. And just practice. I say to people, know your geography, know the geography of the project. And going back to what Diane says, the research and the passion. Passion, you can't put onto a balance sheet, but you can impart it at a presentation, and it's very important that I get animated at presentations because I really get carried away and I can't help myself, but it's just me. And hopefully that comes over to the potential investors that we're pitching to. I see a couple of questions coming in about not-for-profit organizations.
Do you mind if I read that question aloud so people can see it? So Geraldine wrote, so working in the arts involuntary sector with adults with learning difficulties who are consumers as well as producers, I've got to know from experience how marginalized they are. Why are some of these actors often not seen as great and inspiring / filmmakers not invested in?
I don't think it's a case of that, Geraldine. I think it's just a question of time and capability that they can allocate to projects. Every actor that I know that's been successful has got some type of link to something that developed them when they were younger. And that's just going back to research. But I would say to you that in those circumstances, you should be doing it via a charitable company, a company that is registered for charity. That means you can pick up backing from other charities that are specifically established for that. And that means you can then maybe get one of those actors to become a patron of your company. And that opens up doors. And I don't, most of the well-known actors I know, or directors or producers, they make themselves accessible. It's just a question of getting through the first sort of barrier at their office or wherever. But getting patronage for a charity is a big access to publicity for your charity. And I'd like to think that children with learning difficulties would be treated differently, and it's a big part of my private life, making sure that people that don't have access to the normal sources of funding, we open doors that way.
Yeah.
So it's part and parcel. So you need to just be patient, Geraldine, but you have to have the process to enable yourself to get to that stage of getting to somebody that will publicize and actually work for you. It's okay getting a well-known person to be a patron, but if they're just a tick box patron, what is the value to your organization? Making sure they add value is a big plus point.
Thanks, Ed. So before we move on from kind of traditional financing, which is I have this artistic project, I'm going to do my research, I'm going to know who I'm pitching to, and I'm going to an investor with a capital I for this. Before we move on from that, where do I find you? So if I was a musician, I create an album. If I was a filmmaker and I have a pitch ready, besides Googling it, are there networking things you'd recommend? Should people approach traditional investment organizations and say, have you thought about investing in the arts? What would you recommend to build people's network?
I mean, I think networking really is the key word, more than Googling.
Yes.
And there are so many ways to network. I mean, one is to talk to other artists and understand what their financing sources are and whether they might be available to you. That's probably the best source. The second best source is going to be those organizations that are either nonprofit organizations dedicated to the arts, or they're those government financing organizations where they know everybody that's coming to them is looking for financing, and they absolutely have other resources that they can share with you. And I would also, just to Geraldine's question on the film in particular, as an example, doing some research on, for example, are there film festivals that focus on, we're on the board of the Boston Irish Film Festival, right? That's kind of nichey. But if you're an Irish filmmaker or an Irish actor, like, what a great place to either go to that event or talk to the organizer and understand, like, can I talk to some of the other filmmakers? Where are they getting their financing? That, I wouldn't be afraid to reach out to people that are in the same kind of niche that you are. That's really the best way to do it, is to go through other people and that are in your same ecosystem.
That's fantastic. And thank you. Do you want to add to any of that?
No, I network every day.
Do you?
Every day. Every day I'll try and make a new connection.
That's amazing.
And,
amazing.
And it might not be in our business. It might be something else. I mean, I'm big into the sports sector as well, so I think that culture and sport are joined at the hip. They take the temperature of a country, especially just now during the Euros over, soccer tournament. It's on over here, Diana, just now. Diane. So every meeting you go to, don't be embarrassed to hand out your business card when we get back to doing business meetings. And there's a knack to doing that as well. But and it doesn't come easy to some people, but just try and say hello. It's got to say, the hardest thing to say to somebody that you don't know is hello.
Hello, yeah.
And smile as you're saying it. It's you're there for business. And Diane's correct. You're going to film festivals. Boston Irish Film Festival, they want to link up with each other and help each other.
Yeah.
So who's not going to say hello back to you? It's
right. And I think now, this idea of, reaching out to people isn't the only way either. I mean, now it's so much easier to put some of your work out into the world for people to be attracted to you and to come and ask you, what are you doing? Are you involved in other projects that are similar? You can put out clips of your film. You can put out pictures of your art, excerpts from your book. I mean, it's so much easier now to put your art into the world and find people who value it, who are interested in it, and who might be supporters of it. Yes. So don't be shy about doing that either. Allow people to find you.
You're so right. And that actually beautifully leads to the next question I had, which is, from an investor's point of view, distribution models now are kind of blown wide open in terms of how an artistic project can recoup some of the costs. How much is that, do you think, in investors' mind when you are pitching to them? I don't necessarily have to sell my film to Paramount Pictures anymore. I could put it on Patreon. I could have a, click and pay on Amazon. How is that changing things?
I think it is changing things. Yeah. I mean, if you go to a film distributor and you say, I have 100,000 followers on TikTok, or I have 50,000 followers on Instagram, and when I make my film, that audience is right there for me, regardless of the distribution. I mean, I can put it on my website or on my social media platforms, and people will click through to buy it. I mean, obviously, I think Paramount or Netflix distribution deal is more attractive, but the idea is that you have thought about it, and if you don't get here, you can say, well, we can at least get here. And I think that's powerful.
Yeah, it's very powerful. I mean, there's literally hundreds of different types of distribution models now, and there's going to be hundreds more we don't know of, even the next year or two, that are going to come out and be unique. And actually, for smaller independent producers to tie into them is I think is partially the way forward. I mean, the big Netflix, Amazon deals, etc. I call them Dear Santas, because you got to write Santa to get through to them, But they do exist. But the distribution models are so powerful and changing by the week, especially now. People are coming up with innovative ideas on how to get distribution, especially with COVID. It's just what we're trying to deal with just now, and how we're going to kickstart this industry properly.
Yeah, that's right. So, that is right. Thank you. So there is one question, and again, I do apologize about reading this aloud. You never want the dyslexic person to read these things aloud, but I will try my best. So this one's from, and again, I'm trying to pronounce names properly, but if I don't, I do apologize. But Elisa, when looking at a project to potentially invest in, do you consider other types of return? I work for a charity where we encourage and enable investment from companies to arts or heritage organizations, but this is more of a sponsorship rather than the type of investment you're talking about. Some of those sponsorship type returns are about building brand awareness, building community links, or better staff relations. Has these types of benefits been part of the equation for either of the speakers? It's a good question.
Yeah, that is a great question. And I think that is a really rich source of potential funding, because local companies are always interested in philanthropic activities, giving back to the community. I mean, I know here in Boston, if you go to any of the theaters or the film festivals that are here in town, you will see sponsors from local companies. So I think that's a really rich source of potential financing.
Yeah. Definitely.
Yeah, definitely. We're actually in the midst of doing something at the moment, and part of the finance is coming from a sponsorship from a commercial company. They've allocated it to us, and it's not a lot in percentage terms, but it's important because it's also benefit in kind, which you can't really put a value onto. You're going to get product from somebody, they can evaluate what you're doing and hopefully see the value to them, come back to building their brand or making their brand bigger, so it's, you got to think outside the box sometimes, but ultimately keep your eyes on the prize of getting your project made. And that's you've always got, no matter how many times somebody says no, the next answer could be yes. So just keep your eye on the prize and how you can benefit that. I think that's a great question. Sponsorship and benefit in kind is so valuable.
Yeah, I agree. So Ed, this is really to you, it's specifically for the arts, and Diane, maybe for other forms of like tech business. Where along the line of development do people reach out to you? How far along the line of actually creating the business or creating the project?
The best example is at the meeting, say no, And the worst time it happened to me is when we were doing a play in London and they withdrew the week before they were meant to settle, you know. So I had to find quite a lot of money, and it was a big project. And it certainly, I can't be rude in a webinar, but it was certainly,
it's fine.
It's a cure for constipation. So, yeah, so that generally they do it after a couple of weeks normally. And the most important thing is to get feedback from them to find out why they didn't do it. Some people will tell you, some won't, but generally will tell you why they didn't. And most importantly, get back to the people that did back you and ask them what drove them.
Yeah.
That can build up your data as well, you know?
Yeah, that's true. That is so true. And so Diane, how far along the timeline for a tech company do they come to you and say, we're ready for
it really varies. I mean, it can be anything from the idea stage to much later. I think, you know, for the artist, it's really just understanding where you are on that spectrum. You know, if you're trying to get financing to develop an idea, you're going to want to talk to investors that are willing to do that kind of financing. It's much riskier. There's so much more uncertainty. They have to be much more comfortable with an outcome that looks much more like a grant model than a return of capital model. That type of investor is likely to be a different person or institution than one that is helping you finance to get it launched or get it out into the world. So just being aware of where on the risk spectrum, you know, the person across the table from you is, I think, is helpful.
Okay, that's really good. So we have one question from Connor. I know Connor. He's a location manager for broadcast and commercials, but also stepping into producing, which I've talked to him about, short films with some young, up and coming, really talented Scottish filmmakers and writers. So he's keen to develop investment links for kind of very commercial genre films. Any advice for him?
Yeah, I mean, my advice is you know, at the risk of repeating what I said earlier, it's really putting yourself in the ecosystem that you want to be in, which is, you know, where are these films being launched and sold? Is it, you know, are there film festivals that you should be going to and getting to know the organizers and other filmmakers and talking to them about financing opportunities or other talent that you might need in order to take this vision that you have and make it reality? I just think putting yourself in the ecosystem is incredibly valuable, regardless of what kind of resources you're looking for, whether it's talent or money or other kinds of technical resources. So that would be, you know, my advice is to just jump in with both feet and see what the opportunities are.
I would also say that you should, if you can, you've got experience, Connor, being in location. Executive producers are worth their salt. If you can add an exec producer onto your pitch document, it adds a lot of value, not only to other investors that may come in, but to when you're going for completion bonds, insurance bonds, you need to have somebody that's got that type of track record that shows that the budget has been managed properly. And that's where an exec producer comes in. They're pretty hard-nosed, but they'll also give you some great advice and add credibility to your project.
That's so good. That's really good advice. So I think you two are incredibly special, and I just want to highlight this because you bridge a very real gap between artists and the investment world. So I lived in an artist commune, a couple of them in Boston, and not far from where you are. And never when we had parties were like investors lounging around. And, you know, I consulted a lot for, I consulted a lot for startup companies from like, they needed a storyteller. And I went to their parties and there were tons of investors, but there were no artists there. And so you two really represent what I hope we all kind of are coming to, which is linking a lot more this fluidity between artists and investors, and the exchange of ideas. So it's a little bit of a touchy question, but can government or can organizations do anything more to incentivize that kind of communication, more of investment, more of curiosity, more of connection between the investors and artists?
Mm. What do you mean by government? Local government, central government?
Well, either. I mean, I was getting onto which I was trying to gently nudge us there, which the topic we talked about before about incentivizing investors. So whether a lot of the time when you get grants from government, you pay them back. I think you feel really strongly that that's great. Diane, you had a different sense of whether that's de-incentivizing or do you have ideas, having been both in the arts, of what more can be done to make more activity happen, more connectivity?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, the reality is, governments incentivize all kinds of investments already. The mortgage deduction is one huge incentive to invest in real estate. Most countries have investments around making early stage, investing in early stage companies. So if there's a loss, you can take it against other investments in that same space where there might be a gain. So I think, governments that really care about developing an artistic ecosystem can offer even, I think, modest incentives, and that will help increase investor demand. I mean, we're already seeing them here at the state level, there's tax credits for filmmakers that come and make films in Boston, right? They get tax breaks. So government is already very active in creating those kinds of policies. And I think it's very reasonable to think about making small extensions to include investments in the arts, if it's really just capturing their interest in it.
Diane, to your point, I remember it must have been over 10 years ago when they stopped doing that incentive in Boston, and all of my friends went out of work. Like a lot of the production just shut down and moved elsewhere. And then they brought those tax incentives back, and then suddenly it becomes flourishing. So you really tangibly see the difference.
Absolutely. Yeah. And even simple things like, if there's going to be, an art festival or performances, even just, the city being able, giving the space to those artists at no cost can be a big deal. So there are lots of ways I think governments can think about creatively participating that doesn't have to break the bank, if there are any policymakers on the call.
Thank you. That's great.
I think we've got some good incentives in Britain, at the moment, I really do. Just finding out about them. I love the old Irish system where writers didn't pay taxes, basically. But what people forget is that if the writer does the book and it becomes a film, you've got technicians, you've got electricians, you've got decorators, you've got everybody else that goes into making a film, paying taxes and keeping employed. So I would love to see more apprentices tied into the film incentives. So you have somebody not necessarily coming out of university or secondary education who can make a real career as a technician, as an electrician, a specialist in a field in the sector, stage management, all that stuff. And that builds up a thriving community. You just said something there, Jessica, about all your friends went out of work. They went out of work because somebody hadn't looked at the underlying incentive for people to stay in the sector and how it brings a place alive. I've never been to a festival or to a part of a city that's creative that isn't buzzing, it brings electricity, and you can't, going back to my balance sheet scenario, you can't put that electricity onto a balance sheet.
No, you
can't. You can allocate it to the individuals that are making the generator produce that electricity, and that to me is something we should be looking at I would love to see a properly funded studio system in Scotland, standing on its own 2 feet,
Yeah.
but it needs a help. It needs a help. And it doesn't need to have a help with having real estate projects attached to it. It should be standing on its own account, like they've done in Belfast, like they did in Dublin, like they've done in Toronto. And
it's been tried and tested, hasn't it?
Yeah, so there's examples of it, you know. Just they need to take that leap of faith that we have got an industry in Scotland and in the UK that stands on its own 2 feet, but we need government help to take us to the next wee bit, you know, take us forward. And that's where the incentive should come in, I think, on the apprenticeships to make the infrastructure below that work. So there's a workforce that can do the job.
Yeah, that's really wonderful, because you're right. You've said so many things in that. I think a thriving artistic life is a real litmus test to a place in a community, that a lot of things are working right when that happens. I just want to encourage people, because we are running out of time, to please use the Q&A box if you would like to ask some questions to the panel. I've gotten this far without mentioning COVID, which I think should win a couple points, but I am going to ask, before I get to some of the questions, do you, to give people time to think about them and type them in, has COVID changed things for investors in the arts? Has it shifted things a bit? Slowed, made it fast, changed priorities?
It's made us realize how important it is to our lives when it's not there. You know? There's nothing, it breaks my heart seeing empty theatres all over Britain. People, you know, I got to take my hat off to the government for the COVID employment incentives they brought in, but I'm not political, you know, so I'll put that out there first. But it does break your heart when you see all these empty spaces and people talking about how they're going to go back to work. So I think when we do go back to work, we'll start to value it more. And I think it's important that politicians realise how important it is to people's well-being, health and well-being, and the mental recovery capacity that a great arts creative community brings to a country.
Yeah, thank you, Ed.
I mean, I agree completely that it really has shined a light on how important the arts are to our life. I think in terms of investments and fundraising, it's been challenging for organizations because, you know, when you're not producing, it's hard to make a good case to attract financing. On the other hand, as we're coming out of COVID, I think one of the huge benefits is a lot of the friction has been removed from the artist-investor relationship, because you can do this, you can meet over Zoom. So the access that any artist or organization has to potential investors is, and again, to those like niche specialized investors, is much greater. And it's so much easier in a way to connect with people, to make your pitch, to have a conversation, at least an introduction to people that, you know, there might have just been too many barriers before in terms of like figuring out a way to meet or getting someplace. I don't know how long that's going to last before people start to drift away from Zoom, or maybe they won't, but I think it's a real window to take advantage of the opportunity to make connections in a very frictionless, efficient way.
Yeah.
Well, that's on the nail, Dan. I mean, I've seen into people's bedrooms and kitchens in the past year. I couldn't get by their secretaries to get a phone call with, you know, so.
You know, they're dogs. I mean,
honest to God, and people saying, you know, the baby's crying, I need to go get the baby, you know, and they become human, you know, and I think it's been wonderful, but also it's been stressful too, not having the human contact, but it's made everybody more human. You know, and you know, and we all need a hug. You know, that's the bottom line. You know, that's what drives us, the human connection. But seeing people, I've had some real fun nights. You know, that I never thought I would do. You know, so it's been terrible on one hand, but enlightening on the other. You get to see the humanity that's out there. We've got some wonderful people out there in our sector, and we generally want to help each other. That's the other thing.
Yeah. That's wonderful. Okay, so taking it over to the Q&A box now. So Lisa asks, pitching in again in relation to government incentives for investment in the arts or heritage. Arts and Business Scotland manages a pound for pound match funding scheme to enable and support investments from businesses in the arts and heritage projects. It benefits the businesses, the arts organization, but also, as Edward mentions, the wider community and economy. So I guess that's more of a statement than a question, but it is the idea of the pound for pound and connecting those sectors can be really powerful.
Especially for people that haven't invested in the creative sector before.
Yeah.
But arts and business do a great job of educating, promoting. In the UK, that is done. It's an organisation that was set up a number of years ago to help the arts communicate with the business and vice versa. And they do a great job.
So next year is the year of Scotland's storytelling. I think that's the theme for next year. And Diane, I know you're in Boston, but what kind of stories are you hoping to see? From radio to film to albums to what kind of stories are you guys hoping to see?
I don't know. I don't know that I have strong, preconceived notions. I do think there's probably kind of a need for inspirational stories after what everybody's been through, or stories of transformation, more so than usual, I think.
Yes, yes.
We need hope.
Maybe some escapism too.
Yeah. We need hope. We need a bit of joy in our lives, So I see there's a few musicals going to be released, a film, including Steven Spielberg's West Side Story, which I'm really looking forward to. It's one of my favourites. I'm really interested to see how he has taken that. But at a lower level, there must be some wonderful stories that have inspired people, over the past year. I love storytelling. I mean, my grandmother, my dad, my mum were great storytellers, and you used to sit, and storytelling's a gift, it's an absolute gift, and sitting enthralled, you go back to talking about Ireland, one of the films I remember was Barney Gill and the Little Folk. Sean Connery was in it. I couldn't sleep for a week. I was petrified of leprechauns, but it was a great story, So storytellers will always have a place in society. And great writers will always emerge out of situations that we've just gone through.
Yeah, I agree. Joseph Campbell, the mythologist, always talks about the prime function of stories is actually putting us in touch with the experience of being alive, which I always thought was a really nice way to put it. So Gary asks, what projects are each of the panelists most proud of as investors and why? Which is also a good question.
Do you want me to go? Mine was going back to my first project, which was Bill Bryden's The Big Picnic, because I'd never produced before, and I was petrified of producers because I just saw ways of money going down the drain. But with Bill Dudley did the set design plan. Bill Dudley's a world famous set designer from the National Theatre. And the minute he showed me the set designs, I was hooked. And it took 2 years out of my life. And it was and I've never looked, that's when I did run away to the circus. So The Big Picnic, probably followed by the film, was heavily involved in Northern Soul, which was just a wonderful project to be involved in. And it recouped, but it set the country alive for a week or two, and it made everything, all the hard work, worthwhile.
Yeah, that's really great. Thank you. And Diane, for you?
Yeah, I mean, I would say not so much as an investment, but we were, big supporters in terms of, financial support as well as sweat equity when the Boston Irish Film Festival got started. And now it has really grown into, it's kind of like developed into its own major event. It's often the places where Irish filmmakers bring their films to launch them in the US, which is a really great honor. And, you know, we've gotten funding and corporate partners and cooperation to be able to bring filmmakers to the US for it. So just watching that growth and how it's become, you know, a really successful, meaningful event for that community has been really rewarding.
Yeah.
That's fantastic. And that's such a nice note to end on. I want to thank both of you so much for joining us. We've covered a lot of topics. You've been really open and generous with your time and your knowledge. And hopefully people feel a little bit more empowered now to approach those investors and get their art projects off the ground. So thank you both very much.
Absolute
Thank
pleasure.
you.
Absolute
really
pleasure.
fun.
And we'll be over next year for the Boston Irish Festival.
Yeah, and I'll be over for XpoNorth.
Yes,
fantastic. We'll be crossing.
That's lovely. And thanks for hosting, Jessica. You've been a wonderful host.
Yeah, great questions.
Bye-bye.
Okay, take care now. Bye-bye.